Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. The European Union has cleared a major hurdle in its enlargement process, agreeing to move forward with accession negotiations for both Moldova and Ukraine. But as talks advance, debate continues over whether the two countries should remain on a shared track or be assessed separately. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss the implications is Eusebiu Slavitescu, a former Romanian diplomat and expert on European integration, regional security, and Eastern European affairs. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me in your program.
So first of all, can you help us understand what this exactly means that you now moving forward with the first negotiation cluster for Moldova and Ukraine? How significant is the moment?
It's quite something, especially for Moldova and Ukraine. What happened yesterday, to try to illustrate it, is that political promise of joining the European family translated into a structured machine that started yesterday. You know, for something that was very abstract to something very palpable. So that was the decision taken yesterday, but all the European member states that agreed to start talking about, to open the first cluster, the fundamentals one, the most important, and that being the first chapter and the last one to close. And is the chapter that touches on the political DNA of the membership, the judiciary, rule of law, democratic institution, public administration, the core values or the core elements, constitutive elements of, of a fully functional democracy, be it fragile as it is in Moldova. It's still fragile in Romania, to put it blindly. So for Moldova, but especially for Ukraine, yesterday it's a big moment. Let me remind you, in Maidan, in 2014, when actually the war started, Russian aggression, Ukrainians were holding European flags in their hands. Actually, Ukraine is the only country in Europe whose people are dying literally for this European integration. It's how everything started, by the way. Remember 2014. Yeah, so this is also a testimony for the European Union, that this dream, this beautiful union, it still attracts. There's something about it that everybody wants to join it. I mean, look at the Balkans, Moldova, Ukraine, maybe Norway, Iceland sometime soon. People are talking. Because it's much better to be part of a family than to be alone.
Right, very much so. And like I mentioned, of course, this is the first step towards outlining everything. And yes, there's still a long way to go, but at least it does seem like the machine is churning forward. Now, there's some discussion of whether or not Moldova and Ukraine should continue advancing towards membership as a package, or should Brussels be ready to assess the countries on an individual basis? What's the point of kind of packaging these countries together, you think?
They are, assessed differently, each country depending on the progress, especially the legislative progress heading. The difference between Ukraine and Moldova is, it's a factual one. Ukraine is actually fighting a war. Actually, Ukraine, while it's fighting a war of survival, brutal criminal war launched by Russia, at the same time is reforming. That's an extraordinary achievement if you think about it. Yeah. No other European country had, to go through all that legislative process, which is a heavy one, heavily monitored, and full of political checkpoints every step of the way, right? So that's quite impressive what Moldova and Ukraine are doing right now. But because, there's a lot of talk among experts and, policy officers on how do you start, talks or even sign the accession treaty with Moldova or Ukraine while they have, temporary occupied territories. That answer is very easy. It's called the precedent Cyprus in 2004. Cyprus was not controlling all parts of the island. Mm-hmm. They joined the European Union. So what happened is, since the day one of the EU membership, the EU law applied only in the areas governed and under the control of the Cypriot government. What's stopping Moldova and Ukraine to do the same? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So that, yes, it does make things a bit more complicated, but it's not a legal, or it does not constitute a veto against, this integration. Right. Not at all. And the European Union yesterday acknowledged it. Acknowledged the progress, especially for Ukraine fighting a brutal war, and acknowledged Moldova's incredible steps towards European integration. And if you look at it, for Ukraine, the European Union right now, it's the biggest national objective. It's the biggest dream, started in 2014. And look how much they have to go through just to have this happen. So this is European Union saying, this is the hand. Now, we acknowledge everything you do. And by the way, they are protecting our European life. There's only in Ukraine that European values are, for European values, people are dying right now. It's only Ukraine. No other country. And for Moldova, it's the only viable solution, for security, economic security, all of this, short of NATO. They don't have any other solution right now. So this is tremendous good news, because Russia, these past years, especially in Ukraine, it tried to pull these two countries, under the Russian boot, the Russian sphere of influence. Ukraine is going away. Moldova is very, very close of slipping away from this. So now the European Union, what it's doing, it's pulling this country back to the European constitutional order. And this is tremendous news for the region.
Right, so it does seem like these countries have the political will, the incentive and everything to join the European Union. But legally speaking, or down to the brass tack with the technical stuff, like you mentioned, these countries both have their challenges that they are facing, be it the occupied territories in Moldova or Ukraine fighting an existential war. Do you think by packaging these countries together, some challenges for one country might hinder the other country's prospect of actually joining the European Union if it's being seen as a package deal, or are they assessed kind of in an individual basis?
I mean, both files are assessed individually, to be honest. This is what the Commission does, following, monitoring the progress. But by yesterday's decision, I'd say the EU is looking at bringing them both together, the same package. And I don't see, I know what you're saying is right. There's a whole conversation about, can we put them together? Is Ukraine actually more complicated and is hindering Moldova's ability to join faster? I wouldn't say so. But of course, there are specific cases with specific difficulties, so I acknowledge that. But I don't see this as a reason. For Moldova, 2030, 31 top, I think it's doable. Romania actually signed, during Romanian accession, we didn't have this 6-cluster system. We had, 31 chapters. So the equivalent of this in Romania happened in 2002. And it joined, after signing the treaty, and all the EU member states signed the treaty, it joined in 2007. So I guess it's reasonable to say 2030, 31, 32, and Ukraine around there. Again, for Ukraine, it all depends on how it's going, on the battlefield, to put it like that. But, so far he's doing actually pretty great these days.
Right. Of course, it's going to make pinning a timestamp on it a little bit harder, but of course, the progress is being made. Now, from the Romanian perspective, how strategically important is Moldova's eventual EU membership?
As important comes. So for Romania, this is not some form of foreign policy decision that affects us, is good for us, is bad for us. No, Moldova's EU accession for Romania is our national interest directly. I said this in this very studio, and I'm going to say it again. Moldovans are nothing short but, our brothers and our sisters. Because some foreign power decided to draw an artificial line on the map, that doesn't make Moldova some foreign country. No, they are Romanians. Let's be very honest with this. So this is very important. Actually, Romania has helped tremendously, with know-how, preparations. We have people. Romania has people right now in Chisinau, helping and assisting. And it's not just Romania. A lot of the European countries are doing this, and because it's profoundly in our best interest. In terms of security, securing the area, not having the Russian boot in Transnistria. I'm hopeful by the end of this conflict in Ukraine, actually not conflict, but unprovoked Russian aggression, these things to be settled somehow. Ukraine probably would need 2 hours to clear the whole area up. So let's see how things are unfolding. But overall, I mean, especially with Moldova, because right now in Romania we have this sort of conversation about union. You know, Maia Sandu's made some statements, our Prime Minister, President made some statements, and if I'm seeing this right, in the next years, I think the union between Romania and Moldova would become a major political campaign topic, and this is actually very good. Now, around 70% of Romanians, they do want, you know, our brothers and sisters to come back home. In Moldova, we're not there yet. You know, Russia had a lot of time to imprint the footprints there. So that's a bit more complicated. But the way things are looking, especially the past elections, I'd say we're heading in the right direction. Either way, one way or another, Moldova is coming home. And home is Romania and the European home.
Right. Now, in this discussion of European enlargement, we talk a lot about security, about Russia's involvement and influence as well. But to what extent is EU enlargement today being driven by geopolitics and security rather than the traditional accession criteria?
I think way more than it used to be. And that's for a very simple reason. Russia, unprovoked aggression in Ukraine. Right? Look at Sweden and Finland. You know, historically neutral for a lot of years. All of a sudden, very powerful, great armies, great economies. All of a sudden, they felt the need to join NATO. Why? Because you have the Russian bear next to you, who is trying to, you know, to get a chunk of you whenever they can. So, you know, to bring about, you know, more security, to supplement that security, it's what they did. It's the same thing for Moldova. For Ukraine, to be honest with you, up until recently, it was also a matter of security, especially of security. But the more time goes, what I'm seeing is that we're past the point where the EU, where Ukraine needed EU for security, we're at the point where the EU needs Ukraine for security. And we are very lucky to have them if this goes all the way. And I'm hopeful it goes all the way. And I'm also hopeful that Ukraine, after the end of this unprovoked Russian criminal aggression, will take Russia's place in the European security architectures. They deserve it, they have the will, they have the power. No other European country, you know, in terms of conventional military strength can compare to Ukraine right now.
All right, and like you mentioned at the top of the interview, now this first step is very major indeed. We'll have to see how that developed. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it. Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.